rise, please, for the pledge.
Everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. We actually have two musical performances. I guess we're a little backed up from some of our other board meetings, so I'm very happy to introduce Ms. Carol Fowler's Ninth Grade Orchestra, and following the Ninth Grade Orchestra, we will have a short performance from Salem Elementary School, so enjoy. just wanted to thank Mr. Friedman, the music teacher, the students did a terrific job. And we also sort of really enjoyed our Shriver and performance as well. Ms. Callahan, would you like to call the roll? I'll make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, February 25th, 2014. Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 6-0, thank you. We will now go to student and community comments. I would just like to take this time to remind everyone that we are keeping to a 3-minute limit. We ask that you identify yourself for the record, and I would just like to remind everyone that it is not acceptable to us for any individuals to be singled out by name during the community comments period. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Allison White, and I'd like to speak on behalf of the parents who will be refusing to have their children participate in what we believe is a misguided, inappropriate, and punitive real estate testing program. I urge everyone to become informed about the fast-growing opt-out reviews movement and why more and more parents across the country are taking this course of action. As the board and superintendent well know, due to NYSE's incompetence and the failure of our state government, all 700 New York school districts are grappling with unfunded mandates and confusion surrounding the testing program. We know you've been put in a difficult position. However, the overwhelming majority of districts have figured out and also communicated alternatives about how they will accommodate children whose parents are exercising their right to refuse these tests. For several months, including today, I've been told that the district is still trying to figure this out. Why is it that the vast majority of districts in New York State have been able to let parents know whether their child will either be permitted to read a book of their choosing or provided with an alternative location on the day of testing? In the absence of this information, anxiety is building, and parents are concerned that their child will have no alternative other than to sit still and silent at a desk for 60 to 90 minutes over the course of several days. In a child care setting, this practice would be considered child abuse. By law, all parents have the right to make informed decisions about testing. Without this information, parents are prevented from determining what is in the best interest of their children. So I beseech you to provide immediate communication to all Port parents with details on how the Port Washington School District will respect the rights and choices of all parents with regard to testing. I also want to let our teachers and others who work in our schools know that there are parents in Port Washington and all over our state and country who appreciate, value, and respect the work that you do, and that we are fighting to restore sanity to public education in our country. Thank you.
The board has already approved tonight a proposition that will be voted on in May for the district to create a $10 million at the end of the 10-year period capital reserve fund. I have some questions about that reserve fund, and I hope Mrs. Sloan and Mrs. Callahan that we'll be able to fill in some of these answers so that the community can vote intelligently on that proposition. One, first I think we'd like to know why you're opting to go for a reserve fund rather than bonding the next capital projects that may come along, since interest rates are still historically low. But beginning that for a moment, the agenda says that this reserve fund will be funded out of the undesignated fund. That's very interesting because the undesignated fund has no source of revenue on its own, other than surpluses that may be created through the budget. Or will Mrs. Callahan, will there be line items in future budgets that provide for money to go into this capital reserve fund? I don't know. I haven't had the time to research state law, and I hope you can give us the answer. That's money going into that reserve fund is going to have to come from the undesignated fund, and the undesignated fund can only get money from one source, and that surplus is from the budget, unless you can have a line item in the budget that puts money in. But more important than that, where the money's coming from, it's where is it going. I'm anxious, a lot of people are anxious to know whether or not once money goes into that reserve fund, capital reserve fund, whether the board has an authority in state law to take it out and put it in some other fund that wants to put it back into the undesignated fund, which it may need to do for other reasons. For instance, we've been subsidizing budgets for the last few years in order to come in under the tax levy cap by moving money out of the undesignated fund. I think now you're proposing that as much as $2 billion may have to come out of the undesignated fund to subsidize the next budget. We don't know that that's going to happen yet or not. But the point is, $10 million is a lot of money coming from the community going into a capital reserve fund, and we'd like to know that when the money goes in there, it's secure in there. In other words, yes, we approve it going in, but then does the board have the authority to take it out? And to take it out not for reserve of capital purposes, but for any other purposes that it chooses to. Those are my questions. I hope I've been clear about them, and I would appreciate some answers when you get the chance to get it. Thank you.
Simon, parent of a current second grader in Daly, so I have a long-term interest in budget discussions for the district as opposed to just the 1 or 2 year review. I bring that up because I saw in the minutes of the Budget Facilities Committee meeting that took place on the 10th of this month, a pretty clear acknowledgement by the members of that committee that the time for kicking the fiscal can down the road is pretty much coming to an end. That the board is going to have to focus on educating the public about the types of cuts which might be necessary in the coming years after we get through this one. That we're going to need to look at larger class sizes or class sizes in general. Basically all the types of things that we've managed to avoid by continuing to remove from the fund balance. I bring this up because on tonight's agenda, there is an item, I believe it's actually on C7. And it talks about approving a trip to Italy for students, which I don't have a hassle with. I think it's a great idea. The key thing is that in the action item on the agenda, it points out that the cost per student will be $3,000, no more than $3,611 per student, none of which is to be district funded. Now, if I were to read that and go no deeper, I would say, okay, it sounds like we're not paying for this. And that would be the extent of my education. If one were to read deeper into all the attached documents on the agenda, one would see the original memo, which points out that at the very least, the district would be needed to pay for 2 teachers chaperoned per day. I don't know exactly what the teachers are expected to pay their own way to Italy, or that's also coming out. And then this funding would be coming from the Schreiber High School budget. Now, by my take, it's coming from the high school budget that is the district's funding. My point is this. In years past, we've seen not just this district, but others applaud the fact that there were no excess teachers. But no one acknowledged the fact that as long as you have retirements that aren't replaced, you still have fewer educators than you did the year before. If you have fewer educators and more students, class sizes go up. In other words, if you're going to educate the public, you have to give them the whole story.
30 seconds.
So to say that we're not going to have district funding for something when clearly the original memo involved, which you attached upon the deed, suggests that at least some of it is coming out of district funding, does not yield a great deal of confidence in the education that's going to be done on the budgetary choices that have to be made. I urge you, as we go forward, please let people know the full facts of the situation, so they can make intelligent decisions when they have to go to ballot box. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Todd Wade. I am speaking on behalf of our local veterans organization. Those being American Legion Post 509 and Henderson Marino Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 1819 on the proposal of the school tax exemption for veterans. I'd like to thank the Port Washington School Board for promptly placing the school tax exemption for veterans on your agenda. Port Washington has a long history of supporting and respecting our veterans, even naming our town after our first Commander-in-Chief. Our state legislature has combined and passed Senate Bill 1199 and Assembly Bill 565 and signed it into law by Governor Cuomo. Certainly an achievement when both Democrats and Republicans in Albany can agree on something. They have given you, the individual school board, the opportunity to enact this legislation for Port Washington veterans. Numerous school boards on Long Island have already enacted this legislation. Passage gives a school tax exemption to our surviving veterans and Gold Star parents. Gold Star parents are those who have lost a son or daughter in service to our country. Each year, on Memorial Day, our Main Street is lined with residents honoring those who never returned to serve in our country, society, and pay taxes. Now you, the elected members of our school board, are given the opportunity to reflect our community's expression of gratitude to those who have served our country and chosen to live in Port Washington. We thank you for your consideration on this issue, and may God continue to bless America. Thank you.
Hello, Deborah Brooks. When we first moved to this district about 10 years ago, the financial state of the world was in a much different state than it is now. And my husband and I have slowly watched this district hemorrhage. We've watched teachers be cut, we've watched programs be cut, we've watched class sizes grow. And every year we come up here and we say, when is this hemorrhaging going to stop? I don't know if the board and the administration is aware of a major lawsuit that was filed by a very prominent New York City attorney named Michael Ravel. He was the lead attorney pro bono on the CIP case that was unresolved about 5 years ago. And the state, the courts stated that the state owed the school districts a ton of money because the students were not being given their constitutional right to a sound education. We are now facing another fiscal crisis in this district. I don't see how you can't call it that when class sizes are bulging and enrollment is increasing, and unless these kids are in our district illegally, or they're going to suddenly drop out and we're all going to find ways not to have them come to our public schools, our class sizes are only going to continue to grow. The high school is going to start to burst out. I fear just topping out in all of the courses by the time the little ones get up to the higher levels. And I asked this question back in September: why is anybody in this administration fighting the unfunded mandates? Our state senator has a bill out there challenging the unfunded mandates. You should be screaming at the top of your lungs to state legislators, to the governor, to NYSED, and tell them that you refuse to take money away from our children in this district to fund unfunded mandates. I don't see this stopping unless somebody up there on this dais says something to somebody in Albany. And I fear that there are going to be dire consequences because the curriculum that has been started is untested, unpiloted curriculum. You may find yourselves in 2 years flushing this whole thing down the drain because it was an ill-conceived, ill-gotten experiment that is not going to work. And then you're going to be out a ton of money having spent this with no recourse because nobody spoke to Albany and nobody tried to do anything about it. I urge you to get in touch with Senator Martin. He'd be happy to speak to you. Speak to other legislators. Our staff would be happy to speak to you.
to the student certificates that we will be handing out this evening from the board, I just wanted to thank again the music department for the wonderful performances and for the children for being here tonight for those performances. And we do talk a lot about our budget, and this is the time of year where we talk mostly about budget, but this is something we've been able to maintain, which is our supreme support of the arts and athletics, in addition to education. And I just would like to mention that the idea that this board and this administration is not in constant contact with our legislators and Albany and everyone else that we can possibly speak to and bang on their doors, it's a misunderstanding, because we certainly are. And as a matter of fact, one of our board members will speak to that later in the agenda. So now I will turn this over to Mr. Kingston for the certificates.
Okay. The National Merit Scholarship Program has now determined which of the 16,000 semifinalists named in September 2013 have met all the requirements to advance to finalist standing in the competition. 8 Schreiber High School seniors have advanced to the finalist level in the National Merit Scholarship Program. These exceptional students have great reason to be proud of this accomplishment. The staff and administration wish to congratulate the students for their superior performance. And the students are Aaron Bialer, Daniel Vidikoff, Justin Calamari, Laura Yule, Lila Lee, Harry Paul, Noah White, and Julia Zay.
Another student who's being honored tonight, Weber 8th grader Taylor Sinnott, has written a children's book, A Weasel for an Easel. Her inspiration for this book started at summer camp doing an art project, a picture that she gave to her father. Much devotion went into turning this picture project into a book to help others believe and accept themselves while keeping on with their dreams regardless of any obstacles. It was written for a cause very close to Taylor's heart, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. It is available online at www.onlineccfa.org/weasel. If anybody wants that site, you can come up afterwards and we will give it to you. And we will put it on the website because it sounds like something really worth pursuing. I don't know if Taylor is in the audience tonight, but if you are, please come up. The certificate says, sales have already raised $1,000 so far for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. And there's, just because we're running a little late, I'll start on with our next, and I think final student award for tonight. Weber 6th grader Jacqueline Fernandez entered the Senator Jack M. Martin's 2013 Thanksgiving Essay Contest on what you are most thankful for this year. Our essay was selected as exemplary, thoughtful, well-written, and creative. Our reception was held for family members on Friday, January 24th, 2014, to honor all essay winners. Jacqueline Fernandez, please come up for your award.
Before the students leave, I did also, we weren't able to do it, I think we had shortened one of our board meetings, but we also had 3 semifinalists for Intel, and I must say that Harry Paul is here tonight as a National Merit finalist, but he was also a semifinalist for Intel, and I'm very, very proud of your accomplishments, Harry. Thank you for being here tonight. By the town of North Hempstead tonight for the semifinalists at Intel. So again, thank you, Harry, for coming out doing double duty tonight. We appreciate that, and congratulations again to all of our students. Wonderful activities. I do want to officially welcome everyone back. I hope everyone enjoyed the February break. I know we're probably all grateful for a little bit of free time. I did want to acknowledge, because at our last board meeting, we had some high school students who came up and expressed some concerns to the administration and the Board of Education regarding midterms. And I just wanted to thank them for coming forward. We know that it takes a great deal of courage to articulate at the mic in a public setting and to let the community know that the high school administration and Mr. Pernick has met with the students and with the student government to review those concerns and think about doing things a little bit differently for next year. Also, the board and myself, we've been meeting with the student government on council leadership on a monthly basis to go over a variety of issues. So we're really looking to expand our communication with our students, and we do encourage them to come forward, whether it's to their school administration or to come to a board meeting and to talk to us and tell us, give us your feedback and tell us what's going on. There are also a couple of, I know we had some wonderful musical performances tonight. We have some other productions coming up this week. Tomorrow night is our second night of 1,000 Strings. I truly encourage you, if you have time, we'll be in the Schreiber Gym tomorrow, and there will be actually over 1,000 strings. So it's to be very exciting. That is a district-wide event, and we're really looking forward to that. And they are also going to be performing an original piece of music that was composed just for that event. And the Schreiber musical is starting at the end of this week, Once Upon a Mattress. Again, if you're looking for some great family entertainment, please come out. Our students do a wonderful job, and they're very excited to give this performance. Also have a couple of honors that Weber Middle School has recently earned in the Division B Regional Science Olympiad back in early February, on February 8th. Our teams earned a first and third place overall performance and honor, and Weber hosted the event this year, so very, very proud of our students for that. And also, we received just yesterday, as many of you are aware, Weber Middle School has been designated as a school to watch. It is a high honor from the state. And that is something that is renewable, and at the end of, I guess it's 2 or 3 years, and we have been redesignated. I has been designated as a school to watch. So we're very proud of that achievement as well. And finally, I know that there have been some questions being asked about the student review. And yes, administration is working on that, and we will have a decision shortly. So, and I will turn it over first to, Kyle for our student report, and then Ms. Fennick will give us the amendment report.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. The Department of Creative Arts is pleased to present the second annual Night of 1,000 Strings, featuring 350 string students, grades 4 through 12, tomorrow evening, Wednesday, February 26th at 7 in the Shriver Gym. And Once Upon a Mattress opens this week with performances Thursday through Saturday at 7:30 p.m. and Sunday at 2 p.m. in the Shriver Auditorium. The show features the talents of close to 70 students, which is record-breaking. The winter season for most teams has ended with the exception of track and field, where we have 4 track athletes going to represent for Washington in the New York State Track and Field Championships this weekend. All the varsity teams are named New York State Scholar Athlete teams for the winter season, and Mr. Ryan wants to remind every student that the spring season begins Monday, March 3rd, and all student athletes need to be cleared for participating on that day, and she promises the snow will melt.
The student enrollment as of yesterday is 5,342. And our kindergarten enrollment, which is still ongoing, is right now we have 206 children enrolled. Our projected enrollment number is 391.
Thank you. We will now move on to an award of tenure. Be it resolved that the Board of Education, on recommendation of the superintendent, awards tenure to the following individual, effective March 14, 2014. Joan Schwartz, Daily Teacher's Assistant. Do I have a second? Mr. Kinsey. Any discussion? All in favor? 6-0. Thank you and congratulations. Is Ms. Schwartz here? Okay. I make a motion for the approval of minutes, February 4th, 2014. Do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, all in favor? 6-0. Thank you. And we will now move on to our discussion items and begin with the Veterans Tax Exemption. Mrs. Kelly, in that discussion? Yes.
I think I'll just go down to the front. I have a few slides. Okay, I think it's time to go home. Mr. Wade told us all the story of the new legislation. But I guess we do have to be a little more official than that. So, it is true that at the end of 2013, the legislature proposed and the governor signed into law a bill which allows school districts to provide a tax reduction to veterans. Heretofore, that was available for taxes other than school district taxes. We received a note in January from Mr. Regano indicating that this legislation had been passed and that it was a requirement of the school district to hold a hearing to discuss the pros and cons of any potential legislation. As Mr. Wade said, both non-combat and combat veterans are entitled to this exemption, as well as those soldiers or any member of the armed forces that suffered a disability as the result of being in a war theater. And there is also legislation for a Gold Star parent as the parent of an individual who has died while in service. In Fort Washington, however, according to the assessor, we do not have any Gold Star parents, but we certainly do have veterans in the other mentioned categories. This may be too small for some people in the audience to see, but basically in the category of non-combat, we have approximately 339 individuals who would be eligible. In combat, 208 and 25 disabled veterans. What does this mean for everyone else? Well, first, let me say what it means for the veterans. Depending on which category you qualify for, you would be entitled to a reduction in assessment to a maximum number. There was a range provided in the legislation. However, the numbers that I have provided to the board are called the statutory numbers. And as I understand it from most of my colleagues on the North Shore, these are the numbers being presented to their boards as well. So that if you were a non-combat veteran, you would receive an exemption of $12,000, but that's really based on the value of your home rather than the assessment. It turns out to be a maximum of $30 for each $100. Our assessed value is $644 per $100 of assessed value. The average home in Fort Washington is assessed at approximately $1,700. What this means for a homeowner is that if we were to propose a resolution to the board in the future to adopt the statutory limits, that the tax rate per $100 of assessed value would go from the current $644.40, it would go up 93 cents per $100 of your assessed value to $645.34. Basically, if you are considered what the assessor provides to us as information for the average homeowner, whose home is valued at approximately $714,000, and your assessment is $1,787, your taxes would go up by $16 a year based on this shift. The reduction in overall assessments for the veterans that we have on our rolls now would reduce the overall assessment in Class 1 by $24,320 of assessed value. Keep in mind, assessed value is 1/4% of market value for your house. So I don't know whether you have questions on the numbers, whether you have questions on the impact, whether you would like to know what other exemptions we might have.
Could you just clarify the $12,000 maximum, or the maximum, is that per year or per lifetime? Per year.
Per year. And if the veteran moves, the exemption would move with them to the new home. In other words, it doesn't stay with the house, it stays with
And also, I guess, although I know it, just to clarify for you, this is not relevant to a tax cap levy. This is a separate number.
This is totally different from the tax levy, yes.
Yeah, does a veteran have to apply for this, or is it automatic if they're getting the veterans exemption on their other taxes?
It will be automatic as long as they have already applied for other exemptions with the Nassau County Assessor's Office. And as long as the board makes a decision and notification is provided to the Assessor's Office by March 14th, it will impact the 14-15 school taxes. I know some school districts are going through their budget process and don't plan on having their public discussion on this matter until sometime later in the spring, which therefore would not impact that veterans' school taxes for 14-15 year, would be in the subsequent year.
And will this become part of our reorg agenda, or do we pass it once and it's good forever, or do we have to keep approving it?
It's my understanding that once it is approved, it remains. We do not have to approve it.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on Larry's question, in the event that a lot of veterans move into our town, do we have the option to revoke this if we felt that it was necessary for whatever reason?
I would have to check with the attorneys and with the assessor's office on that. I do not have the answer to that.
Don't get me wrong, we're all for veterans, but it was just
Well, I must tell you that there are some communities in the middle part of the island that are really grappling with this because they have a very large veteran population, and there are questions from other homeowners as to what will the impact be on their taxes, and the number is much greater than our potential $16. And of course, your house has to be the one that's valued at $714,000 for it to impact you only by $16. And as it's my understanding that the public discussion is one evening, and then at a subsequent meeting, the board would look at the resolution and make a final determination.
I just have a question about the first category, a non-combat veteran. Does that mean that it was during a time of war, but they didn't see combat, or is it anyone who served in the military?
Anyone who served in the military.
At any time?
Right.
Mary, just from a timing standpoint, based on this being the hearing, we would put this on the agenda for March 11th, so that we would make the deadline then of the county, so that would apply then for the
Correct. As long as that's what the board chooses to do this evening.
I suppose that ends our discussion question period for this. I think that we do have a long history in Fort Washington in supporting our veterans, and I'm glad that we brought this out in a timely fashion so that we will be able to have it on the next agenda for a vote. So thank you. And now we'll go on to the next discussion, which coincidentally you voted.
Yes. Although this isn't really a scheduled budget meeting, we just thought we would review what we talked about at our last meeting, which was relative specifically to the potential use of fund balance for the draft budget that had been presented. At the last meeting, we did review the fact that there's a suggestion by the committee, by the budget committee, that we use $430,000 takes not only the $438,000 from the IRS, it takes $1,438,000, reduces this figure as of June 30th to 2.8 versus 4.3 last year. We would still use the $315 in workers' compensation. You see a change in the total restricted monies. The actual use of assigned monies, which includes the 1.438 ERS money, the 315,000 from workers' comp, and not only 1,398,000, but 2,398,000 for a total use of savings of $4.1 million. That brings us down to needing somewhere in the area of $270,000 to $290,000. The question was stated, or the statement was made earlier by one of the members of the community about the district hemorrhaging. As I look at the tax levy limit versus the increase in our budget, the levy limit only provides for 1/3 of the monies that we need for an increased budget. That is why we're talking about potentially $4.1 million. The unfortunate part, from my perspective as a business official, maybe not your perspective as a taxpayer, is that this formula will continue to cause the district to spend down its savings. And that's why the controller and the governor are now talking about fiscal stress, because they realize that school districts are not going to be able to continue a public education program in the manner that we believe is in the best interest of our students, and be able to fund that through a very limited tax levy. The only bright note, if you can call it that, at this point is that while the teachers' retirement system contribution this year is not really reduced to any great extent, when we look at their long-term summaries and their reports, and they show us over the past 5 years where their returns have been based on market, and you see in 2008-9 that their return was minus 20%, and their 5-year average comes out to in the positive 5.2. The expectation is that slowly over the next 2, 3, 4 years, that contribution that the district is required to make to the teachers' retirement system in terms of percentage of salaries should start to go down. The past 5 years it has been going up, and that's a large number in our budget. In the next budget, we expect that number to be $11 million. So if that can be reduced by $1 million, that's $1 million less in savings that we will have to spend. It will not affect the levy because the levy is totally controlled by the formula. The quagmire, the other, is that we already do have classes that are larger than So I haven't come to the meeting this evening with any additional numbers. I've only come to you with some more food for thought. We were scheduled to have a budget and facilities meeting next week, which for the sake of anyone who's here is going to be rescheduled, and I don't know if we want to talk about the direction that I understood from the budget and facilities committee to make sure that that's where we're going. As of March 1st, I am supposed to post on the controller's website the first go-round of what we anticipate the levy limit to be. And I believe that this board has said we are not going to pierce the cap. So the levy limit will be what the levy limit is going to be. We simply have to decide whether the draft budget increase is going to stand, which it can if you go with example number 2, or if the board has concern about using that extended fund balance.
Yeah, I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I'm sorry for asking questions that were asked and answered. Do we have a 10 and 20-year return figure for TRS? Or can we get those?
No, they did provide us with a report that the budget committee reviewed. They gave us historic information, but not future information.
No, but did the historic information go back 20 years? So could we run like this 5.2 figure for 5 years? Could we run that at 10 to 20 years since it was done over that period of time?
I believe that was included in the report.
Okay.
The different averages.
Okay, because it's the longer the period of time, the more sort of comfort we can take in the in that number. And then have we run either through our actuary or through statistics class or anything, what the, based upon the projected increase, like there was a 5% increase, I believe, in the fourth quarter of 2013 in the ERS, which I assume is similar to TRS, what the actual reduction in the percentage is likely to be over the next few years into the contribution if our projections hold?
Unfortunately, well, you're saying use the TRS projections because we don't get anything from ERS except a one-page note when they're ready to publish the rate. If you want me to assume similar to TRS, we can go back.
Right, I guess I'm assuming, assuming if we base, if we look at TRS and we say, okay, we're going to increase, this year we expect to have a 10% increase in the market or whatever that number is, have we then done the computation to determine what that would actually do to our rate? So we can get a hard, because the other thing that affects the pension rate, I believe, is with the fewer number of teachers being employed now, there's a greater percentage of retirees in the system than there are people contributing into the system historically, so that might put a drag on the amount of benefit we're getting from the stock market increase, so the savings we might see into our contribution may be lower than we expect. So that's why it'd be nice to sort of be able to get a handle on what that number might actually be.
Well, certainly that isn't anything that I will be able to provide you except through the system and the ERS system, and I can inquire of them, but I don't know how much of that information they do provide in terms of the projections.
Okay, because that means if we get raw data, we might be able to either ask our actuary to take a look at it or ask the statistics class to try to take a look at it. And maybe they can run computations that I certainly can't run, but it would be nice to really go in with more than just a hope and a prayer.
I realize that I'm talking to you as if I had a crystal ball in some respects.
Right. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mary, for the explanation. I just want for clarification purposes, if we went with example 2,
Yes.
you still have $270,000 worth of cuts. So I guess the question is, if we're taking out so much out of reserves, why wouldn't we add that into reserves? Does it just put us at a level that is uncomfortable in reserve?
Right. The $270,000 isn't going to make a difference in comfortable or uncomfortable. I think the whole formula that the state has created to develop another piece, another bite of news about fiscal stress is going to show not in June of 2014, but would show in June of 2015. Anyone whose fund balance is under 10% gets charged several points. There are 4 or 5 areas of fiscal stress and 4 or 5 areas of environmental stress that work together to make this total formula. Some of the environmental stress is if your free and reduced population increases, if your student enrollment decreases, if your housing values decrease in your community. Those are things that are way beyond our control, but they count in this formula. But certainly in the areas of finance, we would fall under the 10% as of June 2015. And as Mr. Greenstein has said, we are hoping that these 2 large expenses in our budget for retirements, pensions, will begin to be reduced, but I haven't read all positive articles in the newspaper about the economy. I've read a lot, but they aren't all. So we just have to move cautiously and understand what the potential could be. We're hoping that those numbers help us to have lower increases in future years. We have done a 5-year look out, but those numbers are all based on potentials. We have many contracts for a variety of our labor groups that will be expiring, certainly during the 5-year period, and the actuals have to meet the expectations if this is going to be a positive outcome.
Mary, thanks. Larry, just to your question, there was a report that we received which does recap 50 years of data and the analysis and the average rate over the last 50 years and all sorts of charts and graphs, and I'll get you a copy of it so you have it. Mary, I think the part that keeps troubling me is that the contribution is a revenue item. It's not really a reduction in expense in the sense that we are, to a degree, inflating our income by the $4 million that we take out of the bank. And the difficulty, I think, that we face with the overall analysis is that next year we start instantly minus $4 million when we look at the 15-16 budget. And that's just something I think that as a board we need to keep exploring. We've done the 5-year analysis, and there is some margin for error for sure. That the slide stops in year 3 from taking it out of sort of the piggy bank, and then in year 4 and 5 it hopefully goes back the other way. But that can be wrong, and there are a lot of strict parameters that we've created in creating that scenario that deal with negotiations and future expenses and a whole bunch of things that in order to achieve that we literally are going to take $6 or $7 million out of the bank, so to speak, to stabilize the environment, and then on a future basis hope to put that back by living in a zero increase in cost environment for 5 years. And so it is a slippery slope the whole way. And it really is something that as a community we're going to have to deal with collectively. Because already knowing that you start minus $4 million 12 months from now, when we sit here again, is a big hurdle just based on normal increases of cost. And it really is a challenge for the board, for the admin, for everybody who works within the district, and for the 35,000 people who live in this town. And it was interesting, the other day we were playing with some numbers, and there's roughly 50% of the community, in a sense, is made up of families and children. And the other half are not, just based on some statistics. And so there is a large chunk of the population here that is committed, in a sense, to the well-being of the school district, but at the same time, there are limits. And unfortunately, we've seen the vast majority of over-cap budgets fail.
And that was also one of the other environmental factors, is the number of voters who now to support the budget decreases. They're pointing to that too.
Right.
That's a negative point.
But, I mean, we've seen the last couple of years where we've been at the cap, where we've had a tremendous plurality in our vote. And, but the flip side has happened to most communities who have tried to pierce the cap. And
The real problem that we have been grappling with, though, in the central office and with the administration is, as was shown on the slides, the class sizes now are not small. There are programs that come up every year to be considered for cut and never are, because in the end we all agree how essential they are. Well, at the beginning of the year I have heard that there are students without desks at the high school. That one bothers me because there is a little bit of budget for furniture. So even if the classes are large, they should have some place to sit. It's that the classrooms don't have the capacity for the number of desks that are actually required in the rooms. The classes are just large. And the utility bills are going to go up. We don't have any choice about that. The health insurance goes up. The only choice we have regarding health insurance is during our negotiation with our staff members. The vast majority are all paying 20% of the cost of that at this point, which I think is the greatest in all of Nassau County, with the exception of one other district that won't have an increment over the next 5 years, going from 21 to 22 to 23. But really no one is collecting more for health insurance than we are, and we have been doing that since 1995. We're really struggling because we don't know what we can offer in terms of cut. We did cut all supplies last year by half. We have cut out proceeds on ed programs except for special education students. We have cut the allocation for field trips in half. We cut our PEP program from 6 teachers down to 3. I'm sure that Dr. Mooney has a whole bunch of others that are coming to me immediately, but certainly we want to bring you things that are meaningful, but it is very difficult to find anything meaningful that has not already come out over the past 7 years.
I think the other point to make is that, particularly in last year's budget, we included areas, we increased funding, I should say, in areas that we feel are very important to our progress moving forward. So in the technology area, in the curriculum area, and capital improvements. So we don't want to take steps back in those areas either. So we are really, really struggling with, how to balance everything. And we want to go beyond maintaining what we have, but right now we want to at least be able to maintain, and we want to keep the gains that we've had because we've just seen so much positive that came out of last year's budget in particular. So,
Especially the pilot, the math program, the elementary schools. There have been huge pride for many years from parents wanting a uniform math program across the elementary school. And we are making every effort to determine which of two programs that are being piloted is the better program. But surprise, surprise, these textbook companies want a lot of money. We're talking between $250,000 and $500,000 overall, maybe not all in 2014-15, but we're talking at least $250,000. Teachers need staff development. They need professional development. People are more excited, I think, about coming to school, knowing that that is a potential. But I know
just from our budget side, from our committee, one of the things I think we may want to start looking at, even coordination with the curriculum, is already the next budget. There seems to be, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but there seems to be sort of this movement, at least coming out of the committee and the board, that we go with solution 2. But I think we should already then start looking at next year now as to if the numbers don't pan out over the next 4, 5, 6 months as we are hoping they will start to, the sooner we dig into next year's issues, the better off we will be, because it will really come down at that point to a lot of reallocation of resources and program shifts and all those things that have been avoided for 4 years will be front and center when we try to balance the equation in 15, 16. So it's not something we should sort of put off until December already, 8 or 9 months from now. It really is going to come front and center very quickly.
Yes. And for the sake of the residents who are wondering, what does all this mean for their tax levy, which is your tax bill? Based on this formula from the state that we have the option of piercing, that no one dares to for all the political reasons that are not unique to Fort Washington, certainly. But the levy now would be an increase of 1.35% in a homeowner's taxes. If their assessment doesn't change from one year to another, and if the overall assessment to the town does not change dramatically, they could expect a 1.35% increase in their taxes. The budget, as it stands, is about 3.8 or 3.82 in this draft form. And as I said, going with option 2, the board is using 2/3 of the increase in the budget from savings, and the taxpayer is paying the other third based on the formula.
So one of the ways that I see it is looking over the last couple of years, we lived through having a cut and then also getting many different people together and bringing forward the cuts that they could made cuts, we reduced line items in certain areas, and it was very painful. We even brought back librarians because I felt like that was too much, and had to bring that back. So we kind of put ourselves in, we've been through this process already, so we happen to be in a situation where we are fortunate in the sense that we have some fund balance available to us. One of the other reasons that we were able to, I feel, get through last year without much more dramatic cuts were concessions made by units that really helped. And those aren't available anymore. That kind of lifeline to prevent big program cuts and staffing cuts is not there anymore. So instead of going through the pain and considering the financial situation we have, we can, I think it's a reasonable option to dig into the reserves. Although I think we should all go in with our eyes open to the fact that kind of what Mary and Alan were talking about, when we take $4 million out of reserves to pay for next year's budget, the following year after that, the 15-16 year has that $4 million that needs to be made up again, right from the get-go. Add to that the problem that we've been having every year, which is that the increases in our costs are in excess of our tax cap revenues. So whatever that difference is, gets added on to the $4 million, let's call it $4 million, that we might take out this year. That gets added on, let's say it's $2 million. So now we're starting with a $6 million gap to make up, and we've reduced the reserves. So I just think that kind of what Alan was saying is that when we consider this option 1 and option 2, if we go down the road of option 2, which we're fortunate to have as an option, we should be expecting in 15-16 some dramatic cuts to programs and to staff. Because just the way the numbers are, it's $6 million.
Actually, nothing for the sake of this conversation makes too much difference, but I think it would be 4. I think it would be 4 because perhaps a third, again, would be paid for by the levy limit increase, and 2/3 would be paid for through other sources. Maybe we would get that much more state aid next year. Maybe that elimination aid would come back into play and that would be decisions.
Well, if we take the extra $6,000 of state aid and we net that against the $4 million, we might be looking better. Yes, but also consider if we go down to option 2, our starting point is again whatever the number is plus that. So, I think that there is a chance that remember the biggest cost, the things that really hurt us the most, are the big increases year over year are the healthcare and then the retirement system increases. So there is a chance that the retirement system increase is less or goes down. And there's a chance. We happen to be in a position with some reserves that we were able to take that chance. I think that going down the road of the dramatic cuts that we could go through that path, like let's just be arbitrary, pick half of the gap that we have and try to do the cut process again and the reduction in programs and staffing. But like you said, with 27, 28 kids in a class now, and having gone through the process of cutting, it would be extremely painful for us. So, I don't know, I guess there's no question there. It's just, that's the way I'm looking at it. The one question, I guess not that it matters so much, only because the formula is complicated just 10 aspects, and there's 2 different groupings, environmental versus financial, but where does it put us next year in terms of being on the list of critical or stressed school systems if we go down option 2?
I think it would put us in the lowest category of even being mentioned, which is where Manhasset was this year. There were 72 districts, I believe, in New York State, out of 674 that were noted. I think the key piece for us for being noted would be the fact that overall our fund balance could drop below $10 million. And our auditor has said in the past that we've had a tight budget. This year, as you know from previous discussions, we have an especially tight budget. We had a number of new enrollees in our special ed department that is more than $750,000 greater than had been budgeted for this year. And so that's an item that's carrying over to next year as well. But I think that the main issue from a financial perspective would be the $10 million. And one point that I thought that was interesting is that if you borrow money, if you take the tax anticipation loan in the spring to pay for your expenses for the months of July through October before you get tax money, the controller's office in this formula, they consider that a negative as well. And I know that was one of the points against Manhasset. So we could find ourselves in this paper, not next spring, because it would be the June 2015 audit that would show that this number might fall below $10 million, but in the spring of 2016.
I mean, it sounds bad to be like on that list, but what are the actual consequences of being on the list of being a district in stress? Or, I mean, if you go below that 10 for, say we're right about the positive projections on the TRS and the other funds going forward.
I think it's simply a tool for school boards and their communities to have a heads up, to be aware of which way their finances are going. I think that we're fortunate that over the years we have been able to put aside some money each year for an event just like this. And but as a consequence, I don't see a consequence. Certainly, the governor indicated when he was talking about taxpayers' property taxes being frozen if the school district did not exceed the tax levy limit. He then went on to say at a subsequent meeting that was in the aggregate. Everyone in the county had to present a budget below the tax levy or within the tax levy limit, or no one in the county was going to get the benefit. And while it might not impact some school districts, I do think it will impact some people in Port Washington. Even if that were the case, and your taxes were to be frozen, if your family income is $500,000 or more, then you don't get the tax reduction. So there would be some people, and it's, even if you're a mother-daughter, they consider that the household. So if you have your in-laws living with you and both of them are working and you and your husband are working, all 4 salaries are totaled in the great computer up in Albany, and they tell you whether you're going to get your tax frozen or not.
just want to end by saying what you had just said, that we were able to put money away every year, that we, for just this sort of unfortunate circumstance. And unlike other towns near us, in doing this, if we do go with the scenario of covering this with our reserves, we are doing it with our eyes open and we're aware of the risk we're taking. And in the worst case scenario, we're putting off these drastic cuts to next year instead of doing them this year and taking the chance that we won't have to do them next year. And while you don't have a crystal ball, and it is a lot of hope, it is based on some statistics, and there is the belief that we will be able to go forward keeping our school district more intact than less intact, because the cuts we would go to from here would really just change the face of education for Washington forever. It won't, they're not the kinds of things that are just chipping away anymore. So I think it's a risk worth taking as we're headed that way.
And there was just one clarification. There was someone in the audience earlier who mentioned about the capital reserve. That actually was something that we talked about to a great extent in the Budget Facilities Committee. We had planned on proposing that to the whole board, and we did have to prepare the legal notice that goes in the newspaper that has to go in 45 days before the budget vote. However, in the 11th hour, we made a decision that because we would be proposing to the board to take money from reserves, that it seemed to not make sense this year to necessarily look to the community to even establish a capital reserve. That is not totally off the table, I don't think, but certainly it was not, the board was not asked to do that this evening. In the resolution they had, it simply noted the date of the budget vote, the hours, and so on.
You don't have to stand up there anymore, Mary. I'm just going to talk. I realize that when I'm looking at you speaking through the microphone, I never ask a question anyway, so I realize I'm just talking. About that idea of putting a capital reserve fund on the ballot, I still think it's a smart idea fiscally. The whole, and it's confusing, and I think you want to understand it too, but the whole point of it is that according to statute, you can't save money in the reserve fund at all unless you establish it. And the only way to establish it, we can't just create a reserve fund for capital improvements. So you have to actually ask the community to vote on setting up the account at all. So the irony, or not the I don't know, there's really no word for it. The problem is that we don't have any money to put in a reserve fund anyway. So we would set up a reserve fund only because you need to do it by statute. And it doesn't mean we would actually have any money in it. The reason we could, 10 million, 5 million, it could be any million number. The bottom line is we were going to fund it if there were any money left over at the end of the year. Then the board could take money from someplace and put it into a reserve fund. Now, a capital reserve fund is generally a good idea for any big organization that has buildings and things that break down, over the years. When we saw that even with the roofs, it would have been nice to be able to fix the roofs out of a capital reserve fund when we saw them leaking. Instead, we were tight for money the whole time and had to go out to the markets and incur all the costs of issuing a bond. So I think it just gives the buildings and facilities department more flexibility. I'm not saying it's possible in political environments to do things that are reasonable all the time, but I think this is something that is reasonable for the community to at least at some point set it up, fund it when we can. The way we were going to set up is at 10 years, and after 10 years, if you haven't used the money, Mary, I do have a question for you. If you don't use the money after 10 years in the capital,
it has to be returned to the taxpayer, and it cannot be used for any other reason except by another public vote. So that if you did amass $5 million and wanted to build a pool, you would have to have the community approve the pool by public vote at either a budget vote in May or at some other time. The board does not have the authority to spend it on anything else but for capital purposes as mentioned in the original establishment resolution.
So, and I just wanted to say that's it. I think it's a good idea to keep looking at it anyway. If you want to get a smaller number, that's fine. But I think people need to understand that it's not the number; it's just the creation of an account that you can use. Especially considering that overall the recent over the last 2 years budget facilities meetings, that the head of budget, the head of facilities keeps coming to us with this capital repair almost improvement list that exceeds $10 million, and that we really can't help him until we take up, who wants to raise another bond to do that if we can figure out a way to set it aside over the years. Maybe not this year or next year, but at least in the future.
Thank you. As we end our discussion, I'm going to go to committee reports, policy, personnel. Ms. Johnson.
Just briefly, our next policy and personnel meeting is March 14th at the Annex. And we'll be discussing the code of conduct, continuing our discussion about the practice of returning exams and papers, and a couple of other policies that we review annually. Everybody's invited to attend, and hope to see you then.
And the budget, you're rescheduling.
Right,
Will
I'll
be
be
posted.
available March 10th, we'll post it.
Okay. And curriculum.
Curriculum, we got snowed out. Our next meeting is March 21st, if it doesn't stop. I won't guarantee it.
And Larry, you were going to give us an update on some legislative issues that you have been.
Yeah, last couple of weeks ago, I was in Washington, part of the National School Boards Advocacy Institute, and there were over 800 school board members from throughout the country, and New York and 70, which is the #1 state. And among the goals that we were talking about were funding goals like sequestration, trying to get some sustainability in federal funding, which then would hopefully give us a little bit more sustainability in state funding. We're looking to reauthorize the ESEA, which is the education legislation that is overdue, and trying to get it to improve quality while giving districts the flexibility to meet their own individual needs. We were going to looking at early childhood, and if early childhood is going to become a mandate to make sure it has its own separate funding stream, so we're not taking from K-12 to fund pre-K. A lot of public schools full access to the F1 visa program, and to give boards more flexibility in setting nutritional standards, again, based upon their community and their needs. We met on Tuesday, the day the board was meeting, with Steve Israel and his education aide, and for the most part we were talking about funding, and he agrees with us on funding. He would like to see IDEA fully funded. He'd like to see us get more money. He didn't hold out much hope that he was going to be successful in that. Local control, again, he agrees that within certain limits, districts should be able to have more flexibility and make their own decisions within certain parameters and guidelines. He agrees we need to keep our early childhood a separate funding stream. He actually, after learning about the F1 visa issue from us, he is a co-sponsor of the bill to allow that. And this is a little bit, doesn't affect us much, but there are school districts that bring in exchange students from other countries to give them some diversity. There's one district upstate that every year in the same household places an Arab student and an Israeli student, and they have to pay tuition to the school to be educated. But according to the law, you can only stay for 1 year if you're in a public school. If you're in a private school, you can stay 4 years. And these districts very much want to be able to keep these students for a longer period of time. And just as an aside, Canada makes $1 billion a year in foreign students staying in their public schools. So it actually is a potential revenue stream. If foreign students wanted to come to Port Washington, we could charge them a regular rate if we had room for them and chose to accept it. So it seems like a no-brainer, and so Glenn is on board there. And then he's also working with a group of superintendents on Long Island, including Dr. Mooney, to find out what their issues are with federal regulation and how that's affecting New York State and our students. And then once he gets their input, he's going to reach out to school boards and the wider community to get their input. And then he's going to bring our concerns to the Department of Education in Washington. And although he has no power over the Department of Education in Washington, he's not a non-influential person, and he probably would be heard a little bit more well than if we knocked him in the door and said, we want to talk to you. So anyway, so that was all pretty good news, and you know, I think it was worthwhile going. I think it's worthwhile to be a part of these things, because I think it, well, for one thing, it really helps put our problems in perspective too, because there are people there from states who are worried that their state education departments won't allow them to buy textbooks that teach evolution. So, you know, so everybody's problems are different. And so it's sort of nice to see, you know, to see the way it works throughout the state and what everybody, the country, what everybody's issues are. Also, the National School Board is setting up an advertising campaign to highlight public schools, and they have a few people lined up to be their spokespeople. And one is Khan from the Khan Academy, Magic Johnson, and somebody else's name I don't remember, and they're all going to be on posters and ads in newspapers and magazines if they have enough money to do it. Saying, you know, I'm a product of public schools, to try to reverse the tide of denigrating public education.
One thing I just wanted to add with Representative Steve Israel in working with the superintendents in his congressional district, he does seem to have a very good understanding of issues surrounding testing, and that there are conflicts by still having no child left behind on the books, as well as the new testing requirements, and he was very open to listening to what the educators have to say and some different suggestions, recommendations on how to actually get the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind moving back into the forefront. So we're working with him on that specific issue as well. He wants something pretty quickly, and the superintendents are really working hard to get something. Yes.
Thank you, Larry, not only for reporting to us tonight, but for going in the presence and participating in all these on your own time. And now I will move to the action items. I make a motion for item A1 through D10. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson. Any discussion? Discussion? Okay, Mr. Rick.
Well, one of the things is the continued discussion we've had on polling places, and we've determined, I think, that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000 of added expense to the district to run multiple polling places versus shrinking it potentially to one or two. That's one of those line items that I don't think will affect any change this year, but when we already start to look at 15, 16, every single dollar is going to count. And that's just one of those areas where, for the better part of, I guess, 40 or 50 years, you know, we was driving the road here at whatever. And if that'll put $20,000 back on the bottom and give us a third of a classroom or something else, that I think that's money better spent there than five polling places.
I agree.
One other item on that we're approving a contract to change our student management system. And so I just want everybody to be aware that this data is stored on our servers. And it's totally our stuff and it'll meet the tax system with us.
All in favor? 6-0, thank you. And we now will be approving the following policy for adoption: student scholarships, policy 5800. Do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, any discussion? All in favor? 6-0. Great, thank you very much. Any new business? Old business?
The policy that was just referred to is the Bogart scholarship policy. That's an annual policy that the school board administers, I guess, and each year one or more, usually one, maybe two students are selected. The scholarship fund itself was endowed by Dr. Bogart back in the late 1800s. He was a lifelong Port resident who wanted to give back to the district. And over the years and through various committees, it evolved, like say in the 40s, I would say, to pretty close to the criteria that it's been. And it's the students that are eligible are the top 5%. It's also based on community involvement and volunteerism and the activities that the student does in addition to excellent academics. And upon reviewing this in the policy committee, we decided that given the current economic climate in this community, that financial need could be added as one of the criteria as a possible criteria in the discretion of the board, as one of the criteria in giving this award. And that's the amendment that we've made. So now, in addition to the academic GPA and the student's resume with extracurricular activities and their community service, and all of these students, I must say, have like incredible GPAs, incredible academics, incredible extracurriculars. A fourth category that the board may take into consideration is the financial need of those students. And that will be accomplished by these students who are eligible having the option of submitting their FOPS paperwork. So we have a indication of that. And we're very proud of that because I think it continues our mission of excellence and equity in education. Thanks.
We now will have our second opportunity for the community to be heard. Is there anyone who would like to speak?
In regard to the budget, at one of the parent council meetings, I asked Dr. Mooney to give me a very rough estimate on what the testing is costing us in this district, and she didn't have an accurate figure. Today, I saw a figure from the North Shore School District, which has significantly less students than ours, and they've come up with the figure of $400,000. So I would ask that the board please look at what the testing costs are in terms of unfunded mandates and what it's costing us to administer these tests, to buy them, to score them. I think that's something that the community really needs to understand so that they can decide whether this is an issue that they think is where we should be spending our money. So if you could look at that number and if you could provide that to the community, or you could send it to me, but I think the community should know that number. Thank you.
Are there any